Well, here we are in the ninth lecture, and this is probably one of the most important and significant lectures that I've been able to share with you in my 14 years here. I've been teaching for 42 on and off, and it's a sobering day. Now, listen, because of recent events and also because of SIS being down for a while, um, I'm going to change up the activities a bit. Basically, I'm going to extend the grace period deadline for lectures 4, 5, and 6 to September 28th, which is the day before the debate is about to take place. Um, I don't know if that debate will actually be held. We'll see, but it'll be on your docket to read, to listen to or read, and participate in. So I want everything done before that debate. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because SIS has been down, and I've still got your RNC 4 papers to read and some of your RNC 3 papers. So let's focus on that. And then I'm giving you, I think, one of the most important assignments I've ever given, and that is with Lecture 9. It's about Bob Woodward's book, Rage, and whether or not it's a tipping point in your opinion. And the activity is very close, very similar to the one we just did on the Atlantic article. But this book, of course, has become huge. And here we are 53 days out from the election. Here's the map. I took this polling map to show you the state of the race as more or less an historical archive to see whether or not what we're talking about today is a tipping point or not. Right. Well, we know there's only three ways to go here when it comes to a tipping point, a bump or bounce, whatever you want to call it. Whether something will happen that will vault Mr. Trump up into the high 40s, low 50s, something that changes the direction of the election, or whether it will remain flat or like it has been for a month, or whether there's a tipping point that takes the prospects of a Trump second term down. Right. So tipping points are important. You always look for them in elections. What is the pivotal factor that changes the election? We can have a pivot point now and then maybe another pivot point later. But certainly tipping points are important moments in history. And what we're talking about right now is one of those very important moments in history. John Adams once said, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence." Spoken like a true lawyer, spoken like a true president, spoken like a true vice president, spoken like a true American hero, a founder of our country. Let's read it again. Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. Right. Well, we have now Jefferson's truth meter. Whether a story or a book or anything that comes from the media is a lie, or it's possible, or it's plausible, or it's a fact. And again, I will leave it up to you to decide what you think about this book, Rage. All opinions will be respected, and all perspectives will be enjoined, and I'll be happy to read those and to learn from you. Right, now let's get to Bob Woodward. Well, I'm glad we talked about this book before, because after class I get a text and I get a phone call. The book Rage is out. Did you hear what it said on the tape? And I thought, tape? What are you talking about? Well, Bob Woodward, being the professional reporter that he is, he deals with primary sources. And you guys all know what primary sources are, right? Those are direct sources, information, direct quotes from people to build his stories for his paper, Washington Post, or to build a book. And he's been writing, of course, books since 1970s. Now, here's the deal. Woodward released a tape. He did 18 interviews with President Trump, roughly a half hour each, and the tapes were 9 hours. of total on this. And in one of the tapes that was released, the president, way back at the very earliest moment of the coronavirus pandemic, admitted that he knew full well what it was going to be, that it was airborne. And yet, of course, we know by listening to everything he said since that he downplayed it. And okay, so I'm not going to go too much into that, but I'm just going to play the CNN for early reporting of the Bob Woodward book called Rage.
Correspondent Jamie Gangel is breaking this news right now and is here to walk us through the most significant pieces of information. Jamie, let's start with early February. This is when the president was telling the American people China is on top of this. There's little reason to worry, but...
So remember, for those of us from Watergate, Howard Baker, what did the president know and when did he know it? That's what Bob Woodward lays out in this book. And what we know is from Woodward's account that on January 28th, his national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, tells him in a top secret briefing, this is going to be the greatest threat of your presidency. At the same time, the president is, as you said, playing it down. But what Woodward did with the president's permission was he recorded all of these interviews. There are 18 wide-ranging interviews. And what we're going to play you first is the president in his own words, February 7th, telling Woodward in striking detail just how much he understands about how deadly and dangerous the virus is.
And so what was President Xi saying yesterday?
Well, we were talking mostly about the virus, and I think he's going to have it in good shape. But it's a very tricky situation.
Indeed,
it goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. The touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. People don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know. It's
pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that the same thing? This is more deadly. This is 5 per. This is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff.
John, I just want all of us to remember we are used to the virus now, as used as you can be. But if you go back to the beginning of February, the American public, we thought this was a problem in China. The notion of it being airborne, 5% more deadly. These are very specific details that the president had in the very same time period that he is saying it's all going to go away.
Right, that's February 7th. You just played that piece of the conversation. 7th. He talks about how deadly it is. He said 2 weeks later, 20 days later in India, it's a problem that's going to go away. Within a couple of days, it's going to be down to zero. The president telling Woodward one thing, telling the American people and the world something very different. But the interesting part is the president makes no bones about it, that he was doing this on purpose, that he decided as a strategy not to convey the seriousness of this because he didn't want to, quote, incite a panic?
Correct. So Woodward does another interview March 19th. We also have the audio of that. Again, the president in his own words. And just to set this up, remember, he has been publicly minimizing the threat to young people. Not a problem for young people. He still minimizes the threat to young people. So he addresses that, and then you'll hear he admits that he's not sharing everything he knows.
Now it's turning out it's not just old people, Bob, because today and yesterday some startling facts came out. It's not just older
exactly.
young people, to plenty of young people.
So
what's going on
give me a moment of talking to somebody, going through this with Fauci or somebody who kind of it caused a pivot in your mind? Because it's clear just from what's on the public record that you went through a pivot on this to, oh my God, the gravity is almost inexplicable and unexplainable.
Well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
Sure, I want you to be.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
But John, this wasn't just about panic. The White House, we know, is very concerned about the economy. The president is very concerned about getting reelected. And what I think you have to just remind people is we've put together some of what the president is saying at the same time, publicly, in stark contrast.
The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true. But we're doing great in our country. China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very, very hard. And I think it's going to all work out fine. And again, when you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done. It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear. Yes. And from our shores, it could get worse before it gets better. It could maybe go away. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows. Stay calm. It will go away. You know it is going away. And it will go away. And we're going to have a great victory.
All right. That's the bombshell report. And those are what we call the smoking gun tapes of what the president said in public versus what he said in private and what he knew in private and failed to share with the American people. All right, now, Biden, of course, is going to respond to this, and we're going to listen to the challenger for the presidency of the United States, Joe Biden.
There's nothing they can ask me that I won't give them a proper answer to. Some people will like it, some people won't like it.
I agree with that.
But look,
You answer the
let
questions.
Biden sit through it.
Meanwhile, on the day that we hit 190,000 dead in the United States because of COVID-19, we just learned from the Washington Post columnist Bob Woodward that the President of the United States has admitted on tape in February he knew about COVID-19 that had passed through the air. He knew how deadly it was. It was much more deadly than the flu. He knew and purposely played it down. Worse, he lied to the American people. He knowingly and willingly lied about the threat it posed to the country for months. He had the information. He knew how dangerous it was. And while this deadly disease ripped through our nation, he failed to do his job on purpose. It was a life and death betrayal of the American people. Experts say that if he had acted just 1 week sooner, 36,000 people would have been saved. If he acted 2 weeks sooner, back in March, 54,000 lives would have been spared in March and April alone. His failure has not only cost lives, it sent our economy in a tailspin. It cost millions more in American livelihoods. This is a recession created by Donald Trump's negligence, and he is unfit for this job as a consequence of it. How many schools aren't open right now? How many kids are starting the new school year the same way they ended the last one, at home? How many parents feel abandoned and overwhelmed? How many frontline workers are exhausted and pushed to their limits? And how many families are missing loved ones at their dinner table tonight because of his failures? It's beyond despicable. It's a dereliction of duty. It's a disgrace.
All right, then. So that's the challenger, Joe Biden's reaction to hearing the report. And if you go out and look for sources, there's so many of them. Here's the former DNI, Dan Coates. There's other things in the book that talk about something between Vladimir Putin and the president that looks suspicious. No other explanation for the president's behavior according to the book. So that'll be interesting, but that's a separate story. Joe Manchin, he's a senator in West Virginia, which is currently a pro-Trump state. He says, I don't know how the president can survive this. I don't know how he can. Let this sink in, says Ryan Goldman. Deep. Former Secretary of Defense James Mattis, President Trump took foreign policy actions that showed adversaries how to destroy America, as quoted in the book. So while today we're focusing on just the issue of what he knew about the coronavirus, but there's other things in the book which are also important that maybe need to be studied. Okay, so this leads me to a topic which I didn't expect to talk about until much later in the semester, but Watergate. Now, Watergate was the ultimate scandal in American history. It brought down President Richard M. Nixon. And since then, we always attach the word gate to different things like Climategate, Hackgate, Irangate, Memogate. When it has the word gate on it, it's like an ultimate scandal, a major, major scandal. In order to understand this one, let's draw back and know that President Nixon will win the election in 1968. After losing in 60 to Kennedy, he would win 8 years later and go on to become president. But he picked a Maryland governor who had corruption in his background, although we didn't know it then. His name was Spiro Agnew, as his vice president. Now, Maryland investigated the former governor of that state, Spiro Agnew, and, well, basically indicted him. He had to resign. So when a vice president resigns, the Constitution is clear that the president can nominate someone who then the House and Senate have to agree to. And so he chose, I think quite wisely actually, Gerald R. Ford, who was the minority leader in the House of Representatives. He was the top Republican in the House. And Gerald R. Ford then becomes Vice President of the United States with Richard Nixon. All right, now, fast forward about 4 years, pretty much to where we are right now in this election. The Democratic National Committee had its headquarters here in the Watergate Hotel, which is still there along the banks of the Potomac in Washington, D.C. We call the Democratic National Committee the DNC, right? Now, a security guard is walking along one night and he notices there's some tape on the doors and he goes, wait a minute, that door's being held open by tape. That's suspicious. And he calls in backup and 5 burglars are arrested inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters, where they are putting little microphones and things like that they used to have in those days. And they're also stealing records from their files. We didn't have electronic files then. Everything was on paper. And, you know, what were they doing there? Why were they there? It was then, the story was out there, but nobody saw it was important or significant. They didn't know really if it meant anything or whatever. So a few weeks later, guess what? Mr. Nixon wins one of the biggest victories in American history. He won 49 states. He only missed out on Massachusetts. That was it. Or he would have done what no other president since Washington has ever done, and that is win unanimous victory in the Electoral College, 504 electoral votes to 17. So Nixon was never in any, at any point, going to lose this election. He had it in the bag as the incumbent. All right, now the 5 burglars that were caught, well, they were taken to court, and a grand jury, that's the first stage of a trial, indicated that there were also 2 other conspirators, and they were these guys, Howard Hunt and this picture here, G. Gordon Liddy. These 2 were the organizers, and the 5 burglars just happened to be of Cuban descent. So people immediately got it wrong. They jumped to the conclusion that it was somehow Fidel Castro in Cuba trying to mess with our elections, all that kind of thing. But these 2 guys weren't Cuban, and they were the ones that actually organized it and paid the burglars and hired them. All 7, the 5 burglars from Cuba and the 2 leaders, were employees of President Nixon's campaign to re-elect the president. And I know this is going to be hard to believe, but the campaign to re-elect the president, the acronym for that is CREEP. So here they were, creeping around, stealing things to find dirt on their opponents in the election. Now, in March 1973, there was a top prosecutor named James McCord who writes to a judge charging that there's more going on here, right? This is not a one-off. This is something else is going on. It's bigger than you think. And it transformed the affair into a political scandal. But it was dying away. Nobody was paying much attention. The president won this overwhelming landslide. Everybody loved Nixon at the time. He was getting us out of Vietnam and so on. So it was just one of those moments in history where it was just impossible to believe a story like this. So, relying heavily on an anonymous source, Deep Throat, two young reporters, just new in their careers, decided to pursue the story in detail. The Washington Post editor, Bailey was his name, decided to let them. Now, Bailey, the editor, would get calls from the White House saying, pull these guys off the story. This has to do with national security. They have no business investigating this. And when he got the call, Bailey went to his two reporters and says, do you have a source? And they said, yes, we do. And he said, then I believe you. And they wouldn't have called me if you weren't close to something important. So you keep going and push as hard as you can. And they did. Well, here's the thing. What the scandal was that there was a dirty trick squad built in the White House in order to undermine the Democratic candidate, undermine the Democratic Party. It was an orchestrated campaign of political sabotage run out of the White House. Nixon had a list of people he hated, an enemies list. In fact, it's quite famous, right? In fact, if you were on that list, you maybe later took it as a badge of honor, but mainly it was people in the press. Nixon had a negative relationship with the press, not quite as the same as we see today, but very close. And there were people in the White House leaking confidential information to reporters about some things that had been going on. So Nixon organized a group called the Plumbers in order to plug political leaks from the White House and to catch those that might be saying something that the president didn't want told. Then there was a secret campaign slush fund where they took campaign funds, put them in an offshore bank in the Caribbean, and they used that money to pay for illegal activities. So campaign money was being used, that people donated, that people that gave money to Nixon, was being used for this break into the Watergate Hotel and other dirty tricks. The question, though, was, is this just a group of, how should I say it, out of control supporters that are doing these things? What does the president know, and when does he know, what does he know about it? And was there high-level administration involvement? Did someone in the White House actually know about it? And there was no evidence of that at this point. There was no what we call smoking gun. Smoking gun is a term that comes from a film style at the time called film noir. And basically what happens, it's a mystery, right? And all of a sudden, you know, people in, say, hotel, for example, very Agatha Christie-like, and you hear a shot. And everybody runs into the drawing room, and there's this woman standing over a dead body with a gun, and the smoke is still coming out of the barrel. Well, everybody assumes immediately that she shot this guy, but she didn't. She was the first in the room and picked up the gun in shock, and it looks like she's guilty, right? So the point is, though, the term smoking gun, that's where it comes from. And we needed evidence. We needed, basically, you know, you're not going to accuse the president or the White House of something without a smoking gun. Well, here's the deal. The reporting coming out from Woodward and Bernstein caused the Congress to act and to investigate themselves to find out what really went on. Bernstein chased down the money trail and saw that money was being paid to these burglars, paid to these people to keep quiet, to not involve the White House. There was a cover-up going on. Well, the Senate Watergate Committee was organized, the House Judiciary Committee was employed, and they started to conduct hearings. One of the first persons they called in the hearing was White House counsel John Dean. John Dean was a lawyer, worked for the president, but he represents the White House and the presidency, not necessarily Nixon. His job is to protect the presidency. And he then gave some vivid testimony that we don't have time for today. But he basically said, yeah, I mean, what you're hearing in the papers is essentially what's going on. There's some illegal cover-up activity going on. That just blew everybody's minds. And everybody's going, what? And then Republican Senator Howard Baker turned to everyone after that was testifying about what was going on. He said, what did the president know and when did he know it? And here's Howard Baker here. What did the president know and when did he know it? This became the most important question of the entire Watergate thing. In other words, we know people did illegal activity. We know those people are going to jail. But did the president know about it? Congress wanted answers. President Nixon said, you're not entitled to any answers. I can keep my own secrets. What? Okay, but here's the deal. Another witness comes in and says, well, what did the president know and when did he know it? So why don't you just listen to the tapes? Find out for yourself. Excuse me? There are tapes? Yeah, because apparently since Kennedy, Presidents Johnson and Kennedy and Nixon had taped every conversation in the White House. So there was this primary source document on tape where every conversation, every meeting had been taped. Okay, well, look, this was done for history's sake. It was going to be released to historians later so they could get a true, accurate account of the presidency of these presidents. We don't do this anymore, by the way. But anyway, so the tapes were there. So basically, we want to hear the tapes, right? And Congress is trying to subpoena the tapes, but then there's also a special prosecutor that was hired, an independent prosecutor, to get to the bottom of it, working through the Justice Department. And I'll explain more about the Justice Department later. But the first guy that got the job was Mr. Cox. And he heard about the tapes from the hearing, and he requested the tapes. He said, I want the tapes because I'm going to into grand jury, and I want to know who is really guilty here. Well, here's the thing. The president says, you can't do that. You can't have my secret tapes, right? And so on Saturday, Nixon orders the Attorney General of the United States, to fire the independent special prosecutor that had just barely been hired. But Richardson, being true to his job and the independence of the judicial department, refused. And he said, I won't fire him. He's doing his job. And so he resigned in protest. Well, then Nixon orders Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus to fire Cox, so the second in command, so to speak, and he refuses and he resigns too. This is all known in history as the Saturday Night Massacre. Why would the president fire all these people? What was the point? There was obviously something more going on that he did not want to share. So here we go. He finally finds somebody to fire Cox, and so now there's no special prosecutor. All right, well, Nixon was also forced to fire his own chief of staff and other key people in the White House, and he is trying to make everybody think like, okay, these guys were the ones responsible. I was left out of it, and these people in the old proverb kind of fell on the sword for the president. They took the hit like, oh, it was them, it wasn't me. Also fired John Dean in the White House counsel, and the guy that exposed the enemies list, and of course the tapes came out as a result of his testimony later. Okay, but that wasn't enough. The press, the free press, said, wait a minute, what did the president know and when did he know it? Nixon went to court to keep Congress and to keep the court system from getting the tapes. And he exerted a thing called executive privilege, that he could, everything he said was his personal thing, and he couldn't share it with anybody because that would undermine the presidency, right? Well, the case is called United States versus Nixon, and it's really an important case. I want you to make note of that. And a unanimous Supreme Court said that the claims of executive privilege over the tapes were void. In other words, you don't have executive privilege to cover up a crime. If it's talking about world events, your meetings with other foreign leaders, whatever, that will be what we call redacted. We don't need that. We don't want that. The only thing we want is any evidence related to the Watergate scandal. And you can't use executive privilege to hide a criminal act. Okay, well, the tapes then were transcribed, and we now know that there was a cover-up at the highest level, that the president not only knew about it, but orchestrated it. Here is the smoking gun tape. I'll just read it to you. However, we come up with, this is Ehrlichman, his top advisor, talking to Nixon. Whatever we come up with has got to be watertight. The cover-up thing will be, John, if they had the confessions of some, that's really what. Ehrlichman interrupts, and they'll not only have the 5 burglars, but the 2 mystery men, Liddy and Hunt. That'll give the public a lot of blood. That will give the Democrats a lot to chew on. So he's worried, that this would have the political impact. Wait, there's more. And if we had more time, maybe I'll put this link up on the website. But basically later on, he says, let's get the CIA to tell the FBI to quit investigating this, that it's a national security issue, and so to stop the investigation, right? And to get in the way of it, interfere. Well, this is called obstruction of justice. And then once the tapes were finally transcribed and released, and we have those tapes, there's 16 minutes that's completely erased on it. We don't know how that happened. The secretary to the president said it was her fault. She hit the wrong button on the taping machine for those 16 minutes, but that's always going to be a mystery. Well, guess what? This led to articles of impeachment for the president, which is how Congress can remove a president of the United States. And he was charged with obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress. The House Judiciary Committee was voting on articles of impeachment in committee. Now, if you know a little bit more about Congress, and we'll explain a lot more later, is that they do the work in committee first. If it passes the committee, group of about 25, then it goes to the full House, all 435 members, to vote on. So this is a technicality that we'll talk about later. But the truth is, the first article passed, the other articles were about to pass, and at that point, a famous senator from Arizona named Barry Goldwater, with a couple of others, walks over to the White House and says, guess what? If they pass those articles, which they're bound to do in the House, then it's going to come to the Senate, and we need a 2/3 vote, 67 votes in the Senate to remove you from office. And guess what? There are 67 votes to remove you. Now, this was a Republican senator talking to the Republican president and says, look, you just resign, leave now, because why put the country through this? You're going to be voted out of office. And of course, we do now know from the last lecture that there was a source, Deep Throat, Mark Felt, as we talk about. And then Nixon, of course, goes ahead and resigns, and Gerald R. Ford becomes the next president. Now, Ford did run for re-election after finishing the term of Nixon. He was in the rare position that if he won, he could have run again and served for 10 years total. But here's the thing with Ford. Ford was constantly getting questions. Is Nixon going to go to court? Are they going to have a trial? And will he go to jail? And he basically got fed up with the whole thing and said it's interrupting what we're trying to do to rebuild the country, bring the country together again. So he pardons Richard Nixon of all crimes against the United States. So while we say no man is above the law, in this particular case, Nixon didn't go to trial in court for crimes that 69 other people did face time for, that were indicted and were tried and found guilty for. And yet he, the top guy, walks away. Ford would lose his reelection in part because of that decision. Now, where's Bob Woodward fit into this? Well, he wrote a book right away called All the President's Men, talking about the whole scandal, everything they knew from the inside. It was made into a very popular movie at the time. You might want to check it out on Netflix. I think it might be there, starring Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, who, of course, has a home here in Utah. He's the guy that started the Sundance Film Festival. At any rate, here's the deal. Woodward has been writing ever since, and the first book he wrote about Mr. Trump was Fear, about the first 2 years. And for some reason or another, after that book came out, and it was hard-hitting against the president, maybe the president thought he was going to get a better book, but he allowed himself to be interviewed for 9 hours in the book Rage. And so that's kind of where we'll stop it today. Now, your assignment is a really important one. And what I'm doing is suspending basically all the other work until the 28th, so you can have a chance to do this one, because I think it's the most important assignment that I've given in decades. This is an important one. Name, first name, cohort. Same rules apply. Use the truth-o-meter. What do you think about the allegations made in the reporting in the book by Bob Woodward? Is it a hoax? Is it possible? Is it plausible? Is it fact? Do you believe the reporting is a tipping point? So I'm using the same scale, but I'm asking you, is it a tipping point? And I want you to write about the tipping point this time. Do you believe The book Rage by Bob Woodward and the tapes he made while talking with the president will be a tipping point in this election and why. And back up your essay with sources like so many have done already with the last exercise we did on the Atlantic article. The writing there has been superb, and I really can't wait to read your work. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and pause this lecture. And it's so important that this is the only thing I want you working on till Monday. So everything else, don't worry about it. I'm going to erase every zero in the book and give you all a fresh start on next week, because this assignment is more important than any other that I've given the entire year. So please put some effort into this by Monday, and so we can share some information with you on Monday.